Hello, everyone. Welcome to MCLA and tonight's Green Living Seminar presentation. I'm Elena Traister in the Environmental Studies Department. This semester's Green Living Seminar is organized around the theme of sustainable food and farming. All presentations are free and open to the public. They take place on Thursdays at 5:30 here in the Feigenbaum Center for Science and Innovation, room 121. Today's presentation will last about 20 to 25 minutes, and then you are heartily invited to ask questions at the end for a discussion with our speaker. I'll introduce her in a moment. I'd like to make a couple of quick announcements about upcoming presentations. So on Thursday in a week, February 14th, Julia Friedgood, Assistant Vice President of Programs for American Farmland Trust, will present a lecture titled Realizing the New England Food Vision. Also, on February 15th at Williams College, the log lunch will feature Topher Sabat of Cricket Creek Farm, who will speak on a farmer's perspective on agricultural land use planning and farm support. Today's presentation on Cows Save the Planet, Soil, Climate, and the Promise of Regenerative Agriculture will be given by Judith Schwartz, journalist and author of Cows Save the Planet and Water in Plain Sight. She lives in Bennington and speaks about these topics throughout the world. You may have noticed that Judy's books are available for purchase and signing tonight, and we encourage you to pick up a copy after the presentation. Thanks to everyone for coming, and thank you for being here.
Am I audible? I am audible. Great. Yeah, so cows, soil, and climate, the connection between all those concepts might not be totally evident. So I'm going to invite you on the journey that I took in order to learn about how soil connects with, how it all connects, and why I wrote a book with the ridiculous sounding title, Cows Save the Planet. So a bunch of years ago, just to put it in context, if someone had told me 10 years ago that I would write a book about soil, I would have said they were crazy. Okay, you know, I lived in New York, I wrote about psychology and all these things, but as a writer, the questions you ask kind of take you in different directions, and I was writing about economics, and specifically new economics, which is the notion that the economy should serve people and the planet instead of the other way around, which is people and the planet serving the economy, which seemed to me kind of backwards. So I was at a conference, and there was a fellow who was speaking about soil. He was talking about local economies, and I was thinking, okay, sure, soil as a metaphor, I get it, yeah. And then he made a statement that just would not let me go. And that was this, that over time, more CO2 has gone into the atmosphere from the soil, from agricultural practices such as tilling, fallowing, poor grazing, and chemical use, although that's more recent, but more that's what has lofted CO2, carbon into the air. It has been lost from the soil, and it is oxidized and connected with oxygen to form CO2. And that just hit me over the head, because I thought I knew something about climate, and I thought that the CO2 problem was all about fossil fuels. So I thought, if soil is part of the picture, well, then that seemed kind of important. And if that is the case, what can we do to restore soil? And what is all of this about? So, like the dogged reporter, otherwise known as nerd that I am, I started researching, and what is the deal with soil? And as I researched, it became very clear how important soil was. So one thing is that, as that carbon, which we hear about as a problem, is a foundational element of life and the main component of organic matter. and that you want it to be in the soil. So the problem wasn't carbon per se, but that too much of it was in the air because of those practices and not enough in the soil, that we were losing that carbon, which lends fertility. Also, that it supports biodiversity because the microbial life consumes the carbon in the soil. So soil, healthy, rich soil is important for biodiversity, which begins in the soil. 95% of terrestrial biodiversity is in the soil. And also that soil is so important, healthy soil is important for the water cycle. So just one statistic along these lines is that for every 1% increase in soil organic carbon, that represents an added 20,000 gallons of water per acre that can be held in the soil. And that is huge. That is huge in terms of our resilience to flooding and drought. In terms of drought, we're holding the water in the soil for that much longer, so you can last longer between irrigation and the land wouldn't dry out, so you have more plants that are supported. And then clearly for flooding, that if the soil is healthy and acts like a sponge, then you have less risk of flooding. So I got really, really excited about this and started to think that, my goodness, just about every single environmental challenge that we have can be addressed through turning our attention to the soil. In other words, that for all of our challenges, there's a flip side, an optimistic flip side that we can get to from really focusing on the soil. So I got kind of excited about that, and this, a colleague of mine, did this slide, which gives a sense of the dynamics. All right, so we've got soil and climate, okay? A little bit, just part of it, but we're going to get more of the nuances in a bit. But now let's bring in the cows, all right? Now, let me guess, many of you have heard that cattle are bad for the environment. Here's the way I often address that. I often say that it's kind of cheap of us to blame animals for our failure to manage them appropriately. In other words, the way one colleague of mine likes to say it is that it's not the cow, it's the how. So it's how they're managed. So I'm going to tell you how the cow, sorry, now I'm just going to keep rhyming, where the cow stuff fits in. And initially, when I posed the question, okay, so now I understand how important carbon is in the soil, and how do we get the carbon back in the soil? How do we restore the soil in a very efficient, effective way? What kept coming up is holistic management. Has anyone heard of holistic management or holistic plant grazing? Okay, a few of you have. Has anyone heard of a guy named Alan Savory? Okay, some of you have. Well, I'm going to introduce you to Alan Savory right now, and I'm also, just as an aside, going to tell you that I had the chance to spend 8 days with him in Zimbabwe, and that was absolutely incredible. This is somebody who his level of observation of the landscape is just unbelievable. I mean, he can see, like that an animal, a giraffe has moved in this area within the last few hours because that spider web had been, was facing a different way. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. And even in his 80s, he would walk around barefoot because it was important to him to get information from his feet. And he told wonderful stories about, the animals that he's met, like when a rhino came into his camp and he managed to get a picture close up before there was any threat of the animal getting a little overly excited. So anyway, he's a very interesting guy. So he developed this decision-making framework for land management called holistic management. And the core of that is holistic planned grazing, which is the use of livestock as a vehicle for large-scale land restoration. And this is based on a couple of core concepts insights that he had. Okay, one is that in native grasslands, and when I talk about grasslands, about 40% of the entire land surface, excepting Antarctica and Greenland, is native grasslands. So we're talking about the prairies in the U.S., the pampas in South America, the steppes in Central Asia, and the savanna in Southern Africa. That these landscapes co-evolved with grazing animals. So the land needs the animals in the same way that the animals need the land. So that was one insight. Another is that land can be undergrazed as well as overgrazed. In other words, some landscapes that are not thriving, it's a result of those landscapes not having enough animal impact. So that's another thing. And then one other insight that I think is really powerful, it's something that isn't really terribly relevant to where we live in terms of, avoiding desertification, basically. So what he came to understand is that there are different kinds of landscapes that when we think, okay, so we know that, a global problem is desertification, which is the loss of function in arid, semi-arid landscapes. And we often think of dry areas or an area becomes desert because it doesn't get that much rain, right? That it's the amount of rain that it gets. What he came to understand is that it's not as much the amount of rain as how that moisture is distributed across the year. So just as an example, my husband grew up in South Africa, in Johannesburg, and then he moved to London. Now, he remembers that his childhood in South Africa, every day was sunny. Okay? And then he moved to London. He didn't like it very much. And it rained constantly. Okay? So that's his perception. Actually, Johannesburg and London have about the same amount of rainfall a year. So it's that in England, it's distributed so that it rains a little bit a lot of the time, whereas in South Africa, it all comes in one bunch. And I was there in the rainy season once, and it was intense. So what the concept that Alan came up with was the Brittleness Scale. So if you have a long dry season and a rainy season, and then you get a rainy season, that's a brittle landscape. If you have moisture distributed fairly evenly throughout the year, like we do here, that's non-brittle. So his understanding was the importance of animal impact in brittle landscapes. So basically his story was that he loved and still loves wildlife more than anything. But he saw that over time, the animal populations were less vibrant and the land was deteriorating, and he became a game ranger. And everybody said, well, clearly when the land is deteriorating, that means that there are too many animals. But when they fenced off the areas so that the animals couldn't come in to give that land some rest, the land deteriorated further. So he came to understand that it wasn't as simple, too many animals. And that's when he developed this concept. And just to I'm going to give you some examples of animal impact. But basically, all right, this is another way that I like to think about it in terms of brittle landscapes. So in brittle landscapes, nature was presented with a challenge. And that challenge was, how do you maintain moisture in the soil? How do you keep plants and soil living, keep that soil life alive from the end of one rainy season to the beginning of the next? And that might be many, many months. And the answer that nature came up with was through the behavior and digestive system of grazing animals, of ruminant animals. So they're carrying the moisture, they're cycling their waste and adding fertility, they're pressing in with their hooves, they're pressing in decaying plant matter. And I know that, when we think about the life cycle, birth, growth, death, and decay doesn't get a lot of love. But if plant material doesn't break down, it just sits there, it's blocking sunlight, it starts to oxidize, and, then the whole system is on the path to desertification. So, that's an introduction, but let me just go forward. So, this is in Zimbabwe, and this is about 6 a.m, and these are the cattle that are going out to work. The herders are taking them to the area where they're going to be for that particular day, as determined by the grazing plan. And as I look at this photo, I can just feel the dust. It was so dry and hot there. I mean, we have no idea. So this is about 6 a.m, and I was just aware that it wasn't quite cool. It was just not yet hot. But there they go, and they're off. And this is one of the results. So this is the Dimbengombe River. So after, I guess at this point it would have been about 25 years of holistic planned grazing, holistic management, this river now flows a full kilometer higher up into the catchment than it had in living memory of any of the people that lived in that area. Plus, the banks are stabilized now, and also it runs throughout the year. So it used to be that it would dry out for a chunk of the year. And now that it runs throughout the year, that means that the elephants don't have to travel so far during the dry season to find a place to wallow. But anyway, that was a tremendous difference. And Jody Butterfield, Alan's wife, told me about how they could see the process, that the banks stabilized, and then they would start to see some reeds grow, and then fish eagles showed up, and the whole ecosystem changed and became a wetland, really. Another thing is, when we were at the Africa Center for Holistic Management, we went to some villages where they're working with the communities, the really, really remote communities there. And it was really extraordinary. These people in the villages took us walking, and they were so proud at how much land cover they had compared to before. So one impact of the grazing in the villages is that, so they would bring the animals to the different crop fields. They would pool all the animals together because there were so few. People were very poor, and animals were a sign of their wealth, and, but they were poor enough that they needed to gather them all. But so they moved them to the crop fields so that the animal impact was on everybody's fields. And having the animal impact meant that the water infiltrated, that they could hold water on the land. And what that meant was that they were able to grow food for 7 months of the year instead of 2 months of the year, which is what the situation was when they were dependent just on what the rains that they could just catch during the rainy season. And that difference meant the difference between being self-sufficient food-wise and being on international food aid. And as these people were telling me, it is no fun to be on international food aid. Their sense of, so after this tremendous change, their sense of themselves was so much better, and their lives were so much better. So these are sable antelope, and they are incredibly beautiful animals. Unfortunately, their numbers are dwindling in many of the southern African parks. However, at the Africa Center, you can see how high the grasses are. There were several healthy herds with young. So that was a really, really nice thing to see. And these animals, we had just walked about 2 minutes from the place that we were staying. We just happened to see them. So that was really, really fabulous. Now I'm going to shift gears and ask you a question. Okay? This is a little quiz. Okay? I'm going to show 2 slides. This one and this one. And you tell me which has more water. Okay? Is it this one where the animals are drinking? Or is it this one?
You told us it was a trick.
Is it accessible water? You want accessible water?
Just water.
Volume of
Water. Just water. Yeah. Okay. Yay. Everybody got that right. Yeah. So the reason I show this is in northern Mexico. This is the same place about 25 years apart. This is before they did holistic planned grazing. This is after they did holistic planned grazing. Now, this is northern Mexico, so it gets pretty hot. So you can imagine where it feels cooler. Which landscape? The before or after? The after. When it rains, what's going to happen? Here, the rain falls in there. Do you think that has any, that when you get a big rainfall, do you think that has any effect on the land around it? It would run down and eroding. And do you think that in the heat, that pool of water stays around terribly long? Well, yeah, it would, you have surface evaporation. Whereas in this one, you've got moisture. And it's cool also because you have the plants transpiring. And if you get a heavy rain, it would soak in. So anyway, it's better all around. So I went to northern Mexico. I didn't go to that particular site. This was I'll tell you why I went. All right, so there's this fellow. Okay, his name is Alejandro Carrillo. And he just wrote me out of the blue. And he wrote and said, "Hi, I understand that you wrote a book called Cows Save the Planet. I think you would be really interested in what we're doing down here. Would you like to come visit?" Well, I did, but there were a few steps between. So what he was doing, and it's really one of the most exciting projects out there, is that a group of ranchers were working with bird conservation organizations to create habitat for endangered migratory grassland birds. And I thought this was kind of interesting because you don't think of bird conservation people and ranchers as necessarily having a lot in common. Sometimes you might think that they might have different visions of what goes on in the landscape. But what happened was that the population of these birds that would that they would summer in like the northern Great Plains of the U.S., and they were working on those habitats, but the numbers were dwindling, and they realized that the weak link was in the Chihuahuan desert grasslands, where it was desertifying, and some of it was getting plowed up by intensive agriculture. The Mennonite community, it's unbelievable. There's 100,000 Mennonite farmers, or Mennonites, but huge farms where they're just digging up the grasslands. So this was a real challenge. So the organization started working with these ranchers, and as one bird guy said to me, it's really birdy down there. They're really having great luck. So it was kind of interesting. So the picture where there's me with Alejandro and his daughter, he was showing me a typical desertification scenario where you have very little growing, and then you've got these big gullies because of erosion. And there was I don't think it was this particular place, but he would point to this, really desolate area and say, When I was young, this was the best grass, this place. So that just resonated with me because sometimes we forget, like if we look at a landscape and it looks terrible, we think it's always been that way. So this is what his land looks like. I mean, they're doing incredible work. And one other thing about him is that, so when I saw his land, which is really beautiful, and then the neighbor's land, well, the neighbor also says to him, well, of course your grass is growing better. You get more rain. I mean, what do you think? They're right next door to each other. But, that just shows that people really are reluctant to understanding what they might do differently because people are very comfortable doing what they have always done. And I would say to Alejandro, this must make you nuts. Why don't you just tell him that he needs to change? And he said, don't worry, he will come around. And this neighbor has something like 100,000 hectares of land, which is, 250,000 acres. Well, very recently, the neighbor has come to him and said, I want my land to look like your land. Tell me how. So his patience has paid off. And I just happen to like these bulls. I think they're very handsome. That's Alejandro's bulls. So just here, this just summarizes a little bit of what we're dealing with, that when you have a landscape like you have on the left, you have water flowing off, also water going up from evaporation, and carbon, CO2 going up. When you have a landscape like this, don't worry, I really don't have a cowboy fetish. I sort of have a cowboy boot fetish. I got these in Chihuahua. But, you get, the carbon going down and the water going down. And that's really what we want to do with our landscapes. We want, as a colleague of mine says, nature wants her carbon back. And I'm going to show you another slide, another before and after picture. And this actually is a little sneak preview of the book that I'm doing now. Hope that's kind of clear. Okay, so the book I'm doing now is on ecosystem restoration. Okay, because there's a global movement of restoring our landscapes, bringing them back to health. And this is in the Los Plateau of China. So most people don't know this, but an area of China the size of Belgium was restored. So this is the same place. And that happened over 14 years. So in terms of ecosystem restoration, that brings us back to this dynamic. You're bringing the carbon down, you're holding water, and you're creating the conditions for more life. And we can do that. And another reason it's important, I just want to clarify. So some people might look at this picture on the left, and in terms of connecting it to climate, they might say, this is a result of climate change. But what I'd like to encourage you to understand is that it's also a cause of climate change, because we're losing water, which means that you're in this spiral where carbon is going up and the water cycle is broken. So in terms of climate change, I'm going to put something out there to you. We often hear about climate change in terms of carbon, okay? That often the phrase climate change is code for global warming from too much CO2 in the atmosphere because of the burning of fossil fuels. And that's a really, really important part of it. But the more I do this research, the more I see around the world, the more I really feel strongly that the way that we talk about climate has been interfering with our ability to do anything about it, and we need to expand our understanding of climate change. I'm just going to put out to you a working definition of climate change that might spark some questions or thoughts, and I'd love to hear your take on it. Climate change as manifestations of distorted carbon, water, and energy cycles. Because when we open it up that way and understand that these cycles are off kilter, we can work to restore those cycles. And so we have a lot more agency that in the usual way of talking about climate, we might feel more helpless. So I'm all about agency and all about appreciating what it is that we can do, all about people going off and restoring the earth, as is the case in Spain, where I was just recently reporting, where they have their first ecosystem restoration camp to scale up the knowledge. Anyway, I'm all for all of that, which is why I'm writing the book I'm writing now. So I've given you a bit to think about. I will leave right now. We've got that, the Los Plateau, and our friendly neighborhood owl that is right outside our house. So I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you. Okay.
You showed this, the grass that you showed here. In the U.S., that would be very poor quality grass for grazing. At least what I saw of it. It's a high, tall, yellow to brown. They look time after time.
Yeah. This one?
Well, even that one.
Huh.
Does that really? That's animals that are raised on like this end up going to feedlots to be finished up with grain, so they're edible. Unlike grass-fed animals around here, that they're kind of grass, and you could raise them completely on grass, and they're excellent. Do these people, do they finish these off with grain, or do they?
No.
They're just
no.
totally on the grass.
It's all grass-fed. I mean, I don't know if this is as much the grass they'd be grazing on. I think they were just showing how tall their grass was.
Right, just that the nutrient value of that isn't the same as like the grasses we have around here.
Yeah, I really don't know how to answer it, because I know that they do a really, I went to 3 different ranches, and they do a really, really good business with their 100% grass-fed beef. You know, they're moving the animals from place to place, and maybe I didn't clarify that enough with the holistic plan grazing, that in nature, those animals would always be on the move because they were chased by predators. So what would happen is a lion in Africa or a wolf here would, come along, and then the animals would bunch up and trample. So like the trampling has a lot of impact, and, and pressing seeds in and all that. And then they'd be in another part of the landscape. But because we don't have that dynamic here, we don't have, uninterrupted huge tracts of land with natural predators, at least not in many areas, then the human manager acts as the predator and ensures that they move and are never staying in one place too long. But I don't know if I answered that in a satisfactory way, but they were very pleased with the grasses they had. The animals are doing very well. Yes.
Do you know if this would be effective with other forms of livestock, or is it just exclusively cattle?
I'm glad you asked that. Absolutely. I know people that, the way she put it, holisticates with horses, and absolutely goats, and definitely sheep. Definitely sheep. Yeah, there are people and as a matter of fact, with sheep, you can now buy certain kinds of clothing. I know for sure hats. Oh, actually, sweaters now from Eileen Fisher that are regenerative wool. That the wool comes from animals that are regenerating the landscape. And I know the woman at Eileen Fisher who does the the sustainable sourcing. I mean, she has been to Mongolia and Chile and Argentina and all over to look at animal management. And in fact, she and I spent a week together. We were at Cowgirl Camp, the new Cowgirl Camp in eastern Washington state. But yes, other animals, certainly. Yeah. And what we were doing at the new Cowgirl Camp was learning how to do this, learning how to make a holistic plan, learning how to look at the soil and, assess the conditions and see, what the animal impact is and where you needed to move the animals. And we learned low stress animal management. And what was really exciting about that is that the mostly young women that were there, besides me and Megan, were making a transition into managing animals. Like they were buying land and we're saying, we're doing this. And we had sheep last year. Last summer, we borrowed a mini flock of sheep and to see what the experience was like. But yes, other animals. Yes, someone wrote to me and said that I should do a book on camels. But yeah, that's not my area of expertise.
Yes.
So what hopes do you see for the vast cattle ranchers in the United States in being able to manage their herds? Are they making inroads? Are they just ignoring it because they're profit driven?
Yeah, that's kind of a funny question because ironically, hope comes from kind of a sideways route that without managing this way, they're not doing very well. And so people are shifting to this kind of management. And that's true of farming in general. So I was in Kansas last spring, and people are really hurting. And when you're hurting, you start to ask questions, and you start to see, just like Alejandro's neighbor said, that guy is doing really well. Things aren't going so well over here. I'm stubborn, and I don't like to change, but I also don't want to go out of business. So I really don't know the percentages, but there are a lot of forces working. I mean, it's, our food system kind of creates conditions, puts pressure on this whole commodity system, whether it's commodity meat or commodity grains. And that's a challenge because that does not reward the best management. But consumers are starting to ask for better quality. There's a chain of natural food stores. They have more than 100 stores in the Midwest and West. It's called Natural Grocers, and they made a decision only to source from 100% pasture raised. So those pressures, and then the Savory Institute also has a land to market program, which is giving people more insight and more information so that people who want to know that their food that the production of their food is enhancing and their clothing is enhancing, the environment, then they can do so. So, Epic Bar Company has a couple of products that are 100% regenerative on the land to market program. And then Applegate, they just signed a deal with Applegate, organic, I forget exactly what they do, if it's like cold cuts and, different meats, organic meats. So it is happening, but it could happen more. And I get a skewed view because everyone in my social media universe knows about, talks about this all the time. So it may seem like more to me, but it's certainly happening. But like I said, part of it is that because the way it's working now is not working. Okay, so people in Kansas have a real sense of pride. They feel our state feeds the world. with all the grain production. Kansas imports 90% of its food, and 25% of children in Kansas go hungry. So there's this real disconnect. What it is it's downward price pressure for the commodity grains. The grains get shipped to China, maybe in process there, sometimes come back with even less of their nutrients intact. So we have our food system has a lot to answer for. And it's up to us to really start posing these questions. Yes?
I'll ask if no one else has one. I just really appreciate the argument you're making, the points you're making in this era where livestock is so demonized in the media and the popular press and everything. So many people are vegan because they think it helps the planet, and I think we need a big corrective because that's just false. And as we were just talking earlier, that's I don't know if it's part of the new Green Deal, but it's definitely something that a lot of people are talking about surrounding the new Green Deal. And I just wanted to add something that you didn't mention, but I was just leading a course, a January course out in California, looking at big organic farms, and most of them fertilize with cow manure. And they said there's no way we could produce all these vegetables without cow manure. And so that's just something that I'm not against it's fine, it's great to be vegetarian, it's fine to be vegan, but it's really important to understand that animals play an integral role in producing all the vegetables.
Right, I mean, nature doesn't distinguish between plant and animal. I mean, you need microbiology, you need soil life to create nutritious food. Yeah, it just makes me a little sad because okay, my son put it this way, because we were talking about it, and he said, it's an easy solution to a complex problem. So I fear that many people say, okay, I'll be vegan, then I'm done. I'm done with with all of the environmental climate stuff. I'm done. I'm good. I'm cool. Goodbye.
But people are also vegan because of health issues too, for the desire of health, not just.
Yeah, I mean, but I also know people, nutritionists who said, how many people who are vegan come to them really ill? I mean, I don't know. I imagine, like many things, that some people can be very healthy on a vegan diet. Some people maybe don't get what they need. I don't know. I'm not a dietitian. But
It's just that agriculture is a system, and animals have always been part of that system that's helped us produce the vegetable matter.
Not industrial agriculture. That's where the disconnect happened.
Right, after World War II.
Yeah.
right, and then and then the clearing of land for grain or soy or vegetables often leads to the destruction of habitat. So so then animals are losing their habitat. I mean, it's very complex, and just if we could set an understanding of a desire for healthy, thriving landscapes, and people can decide on their own diets and what feels right to them. And but I guess my point is that we do need animals on the land, regardless, because that's how nature works.
Yeah.
As we all know, ruminants produce methane, right? How does that balance out between the methane they produce, which is many times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, and the carbon balance you're achieving with this method here?
Yeah, so the methane cycle is a subcycle of the carbon cycle. Okay, so methane does break down into CO2 and water. But the thing is, it is a cycle. So on healthy landscapes, there are bacteria in the soil that consume methane. So if they're on healthy pasture, that is basically all part of the cycle. And also, again, it has to do with management, that like when you have animals in feedlots and their waste goes into lagoons, that's a prime scenario for the production of methane. So,
Digester.
yeah.
But
I mean,
you-
okay, here's another way to understand it. Okay, so we used to have billions and billions of buffalo, like more than we can imagine. And in Africa, you know, the migration of these different animals was just beyond our capacity today to imagine. But, you know, when we had like so many times more ruminants on the planet, was there a methane problem? No. So, no, you know, there wasn't. So it's management, it's, I mean, rice paddies. I mean, the real problem with methane is the leakage of natural gas production. You know, that's been found. But again, you know, cows get the blame because it's easy to blame cows.
I think the biggest source is wetlands, but for methane generation.
That might be, I don't know where that is with the natural gas production, but yeah.
100
But we need
million
wetlands.
tons a year for wetlands. It's a lot.
But wetlands also store tremendous amounts of carbon, so it's all in context.
Same as here, right?
Yeah.
Where's the balance?
Yeah. Yes.
So I am curious, two-part thought and question. I know there have been questions or a desire for more sort of research and data on how landscapes respond to holistic management. And I know you've done additional work, you've shared some of your writing on more of sort of the research that's going on. I'm curious if you could share any more perspective or, you know, information about, you know, what people may be doing to try to quantify what the effects are beyond, you know, the photographs that we can see visually.
Yeah, okay. So one challenge of the research is that it's a whole system. It's really, really hard to get control, you know, to control for everything. You know, there's a soil scientist who I respect a great deal. Her name is Christine Jones, and she's got a website called amazingcarbon.com. You know, she talked about how, you know, basically, like, you know, research on soil is done, like, you have to take the life out of it to, like, you know, control it. And, you know, so it's hard to do a lot of research in real living landscapes. That said, there are a couple of projects that have, I mean, I know the researchers, and I know that it's come out as a very positive, that the holistic planned grazing is very positive for the land. There's a fellow also from Zimbabwe named Richard Teague, who's now in Texas. There's Jason Roundtree, but I don't retain numbers, so that I don't have recall. I mean, I can certainly get you that material. But there are, see, I guess where it comes down to me a lot is about land function. You know, are you building soil? Are you building carbon? Are you holding water? And there's some really, really very basic ways to, are you building biodiversity? Actually, okay, so I'm going to go back to John Liu, okay? So the first chapter in my new book is about him. He's a very interesting character. He's the one that documented this. He's a Chinese-American filmmaker. And so after he saw the change in the Los Plateau, he said, okay, we know that we can rehabilitate large-scale degraded ecosystems. And because we know that, we are now obliged to do that. That's his viewpoint. So the experience changed his life. He ended up doing a lot of research on how do you restore ecosystems. And what he found was interesting is that research was also often tended to be on what went wrong as opposed to how things worked. And he said, it's actually a lot more fun to study function rather than dysfunction. So he put a lot of work into that. And basically, in terms of restoring landscapes, 3 trends. Increasing biodiversity, increasing biomass, increasing soil organic matter. So that's kind of the ticket. That's what happened there. That's what happened there. That's what happened there. There, compared to that. So anyway, that's just that my, kind of my lens, is function right now. That's where I focus. Yes?
Yeah, back to your China picture again.
China. Okay.
Yeah, what caused the land to be degraded in the upper photo? That looks like man-made landscapes there. Is that a mining operation or something?
That might have been when they were starting the process of terracing.
So the terracing was done as part of the restoration?
Yes, yes. So it was terracing and planting and composting and removing cattle, or no, I guess it was sheep and goats, because the grazing practices were a really big part of the problem. But in China, we're talking about 10,000 years of agriculture. So, we hear about the Fertile Crescent, and that's where agriculture began. Around the same time in China, in the Loess Plateau, where it was very rich soil, agriculture began too. But over all that time, that agriculture created the Han civilization, huge civilizations. This was the breadbasket of China, but it, over time, degraded. And it was really bad. Really bad. So in that change, millions of people emerged from poverty. John Liu did some films. I'd be really happy to send you lists of some films, because there's some really good ones on the cows. A colleague has a series of 10, 12-minute films called Soil Carbon Cowboys. And John Liu has done a number of films, and he's an amazing speaker because he's got all these images from, these clips from around the world, and because he has such tremendous conviction.
So we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions, if there are any from the audience. And if there aren't any from the general audience, then we'll say, if there's anyone that wants to come up afterwards, I'm sure our speaker will be happy to speak one-on-one. I'd like to thank everyone for coming. Thank Judy very much for presenting, and I encourage you all to come back next week when we'll hear from